Welcome to 5D University, and today's topic is the human control dramas. So, we have talked about the programming, the vibrational scale, the tools and techniques, the divine traits, and balanced harmonics. Now, when we talked about the vibrational scale, again, we know that under 200 is a life-draining state. This is the programmings that keep us in those life-draining states. The imbalance, right, keeps us in life-draining states. The lack of embodiment of the divine traits keeps us in those life-draining states. And so what we need to understand is that when we are in a life-draining state, under 200 vibration, we have to take energy in order to survive. This is why we have been kept in this lower vibrational state. I briefly talked about this, I think, in that video, which was the dark cannot exist above the vibration of 200. Okay? Because once you enter vibrations above 200, you are in a life-sustaining state, which means that you have dissolved enough programmings and you are embodying divine traits and you are connected to your higher self and you're connected to source. So source energy is running through you, and source energy is life-sustaining. That's why in the upper realms, they don't eat food, they don't sleep, they don't do those things because they are in a constant life-sustaining state. The only reason that we are dependent on external forms of energy here in the third dimension is because we exist mostly in a life-draining state. Now, does that mean all of a sudden we're going to stop eating and sleeping? No. There's a transition. But in the fifth dimensional state, you would be in a continuous life-sustaining vibration. And so you're not going to be as dependent on the things that we are here. So things like food and sleep are what we depend on as humans to survive because we haven't reached a full life-sustaining state. And we also, when we take energy through those things, we take energy through sex as well. That's another form of taking energy from another person in order to sustain ourselves. So remember that the dark feeds off the lower vibrations. That's their food. That's how they sustain. And so they have programmed humanity to do the same. So the biggest form of addiction on planet Earth is the taking of energy. We were taught and programmed how to take energy from external sources, like we said, food, sleep, sex, things like that, and to take energy from people. And the way that you take energy from another person, this is why we talk so much about protecting your energy field and really developing that inner strong foundation and anchoring those divine traits. Because when you're anchored into those higher vibrational frequencies, you're much more aware of when someone's trying to take your energy, and you can also protect it from that happening. In the third dimensional state, when we have no awareness, we're constantly taking energy from each other, right? And you'll know how that feels because if you're around someone who just drains you all the time, they're either always complaining, they're always criticizing you, they're guilting you, or they're throwing anger at you, you feel drained. When you're with beings that are in higher vibrational states who are supporting you, providing you compassion, sharing love and joy with you, you feel uplifted. You're in a life-sustaining state. So how do we take energy from one another? Well, it all comes down to the human control dramas. And so I'm going to reference these control dramas, which were laid out in the book, The Celestine Prophecy. If you have not read The Celestine Prophecy, I highly, highly, highly recommend it. But you can also Google The control dramas, the Celestine Prophecies, written by James Redfield. He did a brilliant job of breaking down the human control dramas into these 4 categories. So basically all the programs that we identified of the ego play out through these 4 control dramas that James Redfield brilliantly put together. And you can Google those and it'll give you more in depth. So I'm going to reference the 4 control dramas that he has written in the Celestine Prophecy and how all the programmings play into those. So there's 4 categories of the ways we take energy from others. And once you know these, you're going to start understanding not only how you specifically take energy, but the dynamics in your life and all relationships. Any type of relationship will have some sort of control drama. Until you have awareness of it, you transform the programming, and then you no longer enable that drama and you no longer enable that taking, it stops. Now, I will say that this is part of, when you start putting boundaries in place, when you start calling out dysfunction, when you start leveling up, you will trigger these control dramas in people, especially people you're closest with. Because remember, this is not something that we consciously do. If you were to ask the average person, hey, are you taking energy from those around you? They'd be like, no, of course. They don't even know what that means. They're unconsciously doing it. So when you put a boundary in place, or when you call out the dysfunctional behavior, when you no longer allow it, you no longer feed it, you no longer enable it, it will trigger them and they won't know why. Typically, this will bring up a lot of guilting, a lot of manipulation, a lot of things, because they don't realize that they're getting triggered because they can't take energy anymore, right? So this is something that we just sort of inherently come to understand, which is where we can have compassion, but also know the way the energy works. So the 4 control dramas, and these usually pair up with each other. The first control drama is the Intimidator. And so I'm not going to quote from James Redfield, but I do recommend that you read through what he has written about them. But I'm going to kind of share how I've interpreted these dramas through understanding and having a really in-depth understanding of the programmings. So the Intimidator is one who has to externally control, has to place fear into others, so that they feel that they're in control. So there's a deep inner sense of fear that these beings have that they project out. And there's this deep sense of needing to control because they don't trust and they don't love themselves. There's so many programmings within it. So the Intimidator is someone that controls people around them through intimidation, right? So this could result in the extreme example, which is like abuse, right? That's an extreme example of the Intimidator. But there's also emotional intimidators, and there's mental intimidators. This can be emotional abuse, mental abuse. And what it really comes down to is that these beings are seeking to take energy from you by making you be afraid of something, making you be afraid of speaking up for yourself, being afraid to leave the situation, being afraid to empower yourself. There's so many things, right? And so you might be able to identify people in your life that take energy through this means. And these beings will typically attract the opposite control drama, which is victim. So you will see, again, in the extreme examples, you'll see this play out in abusive dynamics. There's an abuser and there's a victim, but they are actually on the same frequency. Remember, everything is a mirror. So the Intimidator and the victim are actually on the same line of frequency, just opposite ends of the spectrum. The Intimidator seeks to control and dominate others and place fear into them so that they can keep their sense of control. The victim gives up all sense of control, right? They allow themselves to be controlled And they basically give their power away. So you've got the intimidator who seeks power, and you've got the victim who is willing to give up their power. This creates a lot of control drama. So of course the intimidator takes energy through fear and control. The victim takes energy through playing the victim, being the martyr, poor me, right? But they're not really doing anything to empower themselves. They're choosing that victimhood. And they use guilt, a lot of guilt, to take energy. And they get attention from their victimhood, and that's their way of taking energy. It's their way of getting attention. Remember, all of these come from the programmings that we have been taught that we're not worthy of love. That is what this whole third dimensional realm comes down to, is that we believe at a core level that we are separated from source and that we are undeserving of love. And so we either have to earn it, we have to control others, or basically intimidate them into giving us love. We have to guilt them into love. We have to take something from them to get love. We have to get attention from them. These are all just programmings because we just lack the full understanding that we are worthy of all that love is, and that we ourselves are God with God, and we have to embody that as well, and then it will be reflected to us. So the intimidator and the victim play out a lot. You might be able to obviously see these in many dynamics. What I will say is that we typically, what I have found from my experience and with working with thousands of people at this point, is we typically develop either the same control dramas that our parents had, or whoever raised us, whoever we were the most impacted by as a child. We develop their same control dramas, or we develop the opposite control drama as some sort of act of rebellion, right? But really we're on the same frequency. We're just going to the other side. So for example, if you grew up in a household where the intimidator control drama was often used, you will either play that out in your adult life. You might reenact and become the intimidator again because you learn that that is how you gain love, or you would flip to the other side of the spectrum, which is the victim. And so feel into, what control dramas were present in your life as a child, what control dramas you have with your families, because these tend to be where we develop them and where we most have to break them. And then, of course, we look at our relationships with others and how this has played out. Same thing, vice versa for the victim. If you grew up in a household where victim was used a lot, guilt, manipulation, that sort of thing, you might reenact that, or you might flip to the other side and become the intimidator because you are so now you reject that victim nature. But again, we always end up playing one side of the coin. And with victim, it's really a lack of empowerment, a lack of self-love, and it's a powerlessness, right? So you have a powerlessness versus a power hungry, and those dynamics attract each other. Now, the other two control dramas that also tend to attract one another, or they are, again, two sides of the same coin, just opposite ends. The first one would be the interrogator. The interrogator is when we ask questions that we already know the answer to. Or when we are we are interrogating someone, which means we're either asking a question that we already know the answer to. I can name a million examples of this. I feel I have done this many times in my life as well. Like you kind of already know the answer, but the interrogator tries to get love and attention through talking. And so when the interrogator feels like the other person is not giving them love or attention, they start asking them a bunch of questions because they're trying to form a bond. They're trying to interact with that person. They're trying to get love and attention from them. And they know no other way other than to just ask them a bunch of questions. So you might have come across people like this in your life. It could be you as well. It could be how you grew up, where there's like this obsession with information about the person, getting that they want you to open up and talk to them and tell them things. But it becomes an interrogation because you cannot force people to, that energy will naturally repel, right? So the interrogator is someone who basically uses questions as a form of conversation, and that's not organic. It's very robotic. So you might have grown up in a household where your parents are always asking you a million questions. Where are you going? What are you doing? What time are you going to be home? Who are you going with? And you might have this with other people as well, other dynamics. Let's say the interrogator also lacks listening skills. So it might be something that they've asked you the same question 10 times, and now you're just tired of answering it. So you're just like, I'm not even answering you anymore. I've already repeated myself, because they're not actually listening. They're asking questions simply to force conversation so that they can gain energy and attention from the conversation. Now, this usually attracts the opposite end of the frequency, which is the aloof programming. And the aloof programming is one who basically rebels against the interrogation and becomes aloof. They tend to be the ones who, they're always kind of either isolated, or they are, people that are very aloof. They don't answer questions. You kind of ask them something, they're very vague about their answer. They never really tell you what they're doing. They never really communicate. They're often very kind of mysterious or guarded. They don't offer up a lot of information. So you'll see with the Intimidator victim, it's going to be a lot more emotional taking of energy, and can be physical as well, as we said, abuse. The interrogator aloof is more of a mental taking of energy. It's the talking versus the not talking, the shutting down versus the one who keeps prying. And so again, if we grew up around these programmings, we either reenact them or we may become the opposite. So the aloof one takes energy by being mysterious. People are always chasing the aloof person, right? Trying to pin them down, trying to get them to open up, trying to have them communicate. And so they take energy that way, because they know, someone's always going to be chasing me. Someone's always going to be, coming, wanting to talk to me, wanting to do this. And so that's how they take energy, is they kind of hide and they let people chase them. And the interrogator will absolutely do the chasing, and the aloof will run. And so you can see how these play together. The interrogators, like I said, lack listening skills. So they don't actually listen to what you're saying. And truthfully, with the programming, they're not actually interested in what you're saying. They just want the energy of talking. So it's very mental, it's very analytical, very logical, and it's basically just making conversation that has no real meaning. It's very empty on the surface. Now, the aloof doesn't have communication skills. So they don't really know how to express themselves, how to share things. And so you have this dynamic of lack of listening and lack of communication, right? As the same way on the other end, you have lack of empowerment and overpower. You can see how all the programmings interact with these. Now, not to say that these dynamics don't crisscross, because they definitely do. These can all crisscross together. And so you'll be able to start realizing and picking up where these programmings in your life that you grew up with and where you are reenacting them, and how humans take energy from one another. It's very subtle, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so you might also have family or partners, or whatever, who they embody all different ones. You can definitely embody both at different times. Typically, we do embody both, especially if it's on the same frequency level. Interrogator and aloof, we might go back and forth between the two. In Intimidator and victim, we might go back and forth between the two. And these can definitely cross over, and these can intermingle. It's not just the two stay on their lanes, but these generally cross over into many aspects of our lives. So this is again where the protection of your energy comes in. This is where the inner work really comes in, because when you've done the inner work and you've really started to dissolve these programmings, you become aware of the control dramas and how they play out. You start setting boundaries. You start gaining your own empowerment. You start embodying the higher self. You will start to realize that others cannot take energy from you like they used to. This often triggers them. Just as kind of so everyone's aware, it will trigger people, and it's part of this process, because as I said, we've all learned how to take energy on some level. And when that source of energy is now blocked, we become upset, we become triggered, we can become angry, because unconsciously our source of energy has now been cut off, and we now have to go within and provide our own life-sustaining energy, so that all of our interactions, we are giving and receiving, not taking and hoarding, right? So these will come up. Again, I highly recommend The Celestine Prophecy. It's an amazing book. Not only does it go through the control dramas, but it goes through all the insights of the awakening and all the stages of kind of the awakening process. And it's a fabulous tool for those who are on the journey. Absolutely love James Redfield. So thank you guys for sharing. If there's any questions, of course, comment, and any additional resources that you would like, you can go to our home website at 5dfulldisclosure.org, and you can hit the library tab. And of course, if you're looking for one-on-one guidance, you can always book a session, and I will see you guys soon.